Hi, this is Pat Baker, and we're going to discuss our hospital employee assignment. And I have pulled up here the UML, and this is really your design document for completing this assignment. Makes your life a little easier here because somebody's already come up with the design. But let's take a look at this and see how it's broken apart. You've got the name of the class. All of the instance variables will be in this area of the UML, and then the methods that you also have to implement. In this discussion here, we're going to just implement a few of these methods and give you a strategy for completing the rest of this assignment. So when we're looking at implementing a user-defined Java class, it's helpful just to think about this in a very simple structure. And I have an example here. I just called it sample Java class. And this is how we're going to structure our implementation of the hospital employee class. So we're going to declare our instance variables. We're going to implement any constructor methods. We'll implement our accessor or get methods. We'll implement our mutator or set methods, and then any other methods, including the toString method. So now with that structure in mind, let's go back to hospital employee. So if you look at the assignment, there are 4 instance variables in the hospital employee class. So we're going to take all of those and put those right into our hospital employee file. So here we have our instance variables, and the access modifier on the instance variables is private, which will encapsulate our data or data hide. So now let's go to the next step, which is implementing our constructor. I'm going to come back to the UML. And the UML has some important information for us. It gives us the method signature here, and then some information about what we want the default values to be for the instance variables. So it says we're going to assign all the instance variables, and we're going to give them a default value, and each of those instance variables should get a value inside the constructor. So we're going to set it to these things, these items here, and let's go back and look at our code. So we've gone ahead and implemented the first constructor, and the task of the constructor is to give the instance variables some default data or some data when an object is created or instantiated. So we've taken care of all 4 instance variables and given them some default values. Of course, you'll put your own name in here, not my name. So the next group of methods that we want to implement are the accessor methods or the getter methods, and we'll just implement one of these so you can get an example, and then the other ones are very similar, and then we'll implement one of the mutator methods here too. So I took the method signature right from the UML, and the task of getters or accessors is when the object calls these methods is to return the value of an object's instance variable. So in this case, we'll just be returning the imp name. The data return data type, let's talk about method components of the signature for a minute. This is the access modifier. You'll notice that that's public. That's because we want to be able to utilize this outside of the hospital employee class. The name of the method is getEmployeeName. There are no formal parameters, and it is returning a string. This is the data return type. So this method must have a return statement, and the data that it's returning must be a string. So you're going to go ahead and implement these other 3 access methods. And now let's go ahead and do this first mutator method, set employee name. All right, so we've implemented this mutator. It also will be public. In other words, it can be used by the object outside of this class. The name is setEmpName. it has one formal parameter. It's passing in a string, and it's using that parameter to set the object's instance variable called empName. Notice that the data return type is void because we are not returning any data. So let's look at one of these other methods here, possibly the changed hours work method. That actually is a lot like what you did with deposit in bank account. So here's the method signature, and it says it changes the instance variable hours worked by the hours. Hours worked should be updated to hours worked plus hours. In other words, if an object has their hours worked is 30 and you wanted to increase that to 40, you would add 10 to that and pass that in this formal parameter here. So let's go ahead and implement this method. All right, so here's the implementation of changed hours worked. The method signature is identical to what is in the UML, and that's what you should do. It again is public. It can be used by the object outside of this class. The name is changed hours worked. It has one formal parameter, double the hours, which is a double. It is not returning any data, but it's updating the instance variable for a given object by the hours. So the current hours worked will be updated into the new hours worked. I want to talk a little bit about the scope of the instance variables inside this class. Notice I did not need to redefine hours worked here. Since it's an instance variable, it can be used, and it should not be redefined. So it can be used anywhere inside this hospital employee class. So let's look at one more method. Let's look at the calculate gross pay. And for a given object, we want to return the gross pay, which is the hours worked times the pay rate. So there's your method signature, and let's go ahead and implement it. So again, here's our method. It's public. The name is calculate gross pay. Notice I'm not passing anything into it because you can get to an object's hours worked and pay rate without having to redefine them. And you want to multiply those together and return it, and that will be the gross pay. Now, some of you may do something like this. You may want to create a local variable called bonus and set that equal to hours worked times the object's pay rate. And then, of course, you would return the bonus. So that also is another way of handling the implementation of calculate gross pay. The last method that I'm going to show you how to implement is the toString method, which you should always define in your class. And it should return the state of a given object. In other words, it should return all of the values of an object's instance variable as a string. And that really is for you to have a quick way of printing out, when you want to, the current state of an object. So let's go ahead and implement this method. So here we go. The goal of this method is to return the current state of an object. So we really want to return all of the values of the instance variables in a nice string. So I've just created a string that's taking and writing out the employee name and identifying the different instance variables and then writing them out. And then I decided, well, since pay rate is in dollars and cents, I went ahead and formatted this. This is just one big string that's getting returned when the object calls it. So let's go back and see if we've implemented everything or talked about everything in our assignment. And then in the next video, we'll talk about creating the tester class. All right, so you've got a couple more methods to implement, but you've got some examples And let's make sure we did adhere to the UML diagram. We did not add any additional instance variables or methods. So I think we're all set. Okay, well, let's go ahead and listen to the next video note, and we'll talk about implementing our tester class called Hospital.